So as we come together this morning, the title of today's talk is "What are you prepared to do?" And I love it. It comes from a movie, and you know I love movies and old movies especially. And of course, this movie wasn't so wasn't so old until I looked up in the on the internet and found out it was made in 1987. I would have thought it was much newer, but I guess the older I get, the faster time goes. And many of us grew up in what I will call the golden age of television, the early 50s and 60s, when TV was trying to find its place as a medium. You know, what was it there for? You know, they actually tried to do things like they had playhouse theaters, and they tried to put good serious dramas on TV. And of course, over time, it's kind of evolved into a vehicle for delivering commercials. You know, we get reality TV without writers and things like that. But nevertheless, if you go back to the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, I think it was, you probably remember a TV show with Robert Stack in it, and it was called Eliot Ness and the Untouchables. And every week, you know, Eliot Ness, who was a federal agent, would go out and fight crime with the mobsters and the bootleggers in old Chicago during Prohibition. And I just want to toss out that Robert Stack, the actor Robert Stack, he attended Dr. Holmes Church in Los Angeles, and I think at one point I saw a picture somebody had, or Dr. J may have told us this in the history center he had at Asilomar. But Dr. Holmes, Ernest Holmes, actually baptized one of the Stack children in the church in Los Angeles. But I digress so easily. But in the 80s, in the late 80s, 1987, Hollywood gave us a remake of the story of the Untouchables, and Kevin Costner played the lead role of Eliot Ness. And then one of the main characters in the movie was played by Sean Connery. And Sean Connery was a tough Irish beat cop in Chicago. You know, he would walk his beat with nothing more than a nightstick, and he would rain he would rain terror on anybody who didn't toe the line. And it was funny to me because he was playing an Irish cop with a Welsh accent, but it was a typical storyline in a movie where you have a mentor. You know, Kevin Costner comes in and he's the young federal agent, not exactly sure how to deal with all these mobsters, and Sean Connery is kind of showing him the ropes. You know, kind of a rite of passage. You saw the same thing in Men in Black, you know, with Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, the old guy and the new guy. It's a common theme that you'll see in movies. But during the movie, Sean Connery is constantly tutoring Eliot Ness, constantly teaching him what it is that he needs to do if he is to carry out the role that he has accepted, which is to break the back of the mobsters. And he does this with a line that he repeats over and over through the movie at key points, you know, you would call plot points in the movie, where something's going to turn, something's going to change here in the story. And he's got his nightstick in, I think in one of the parts, he's got his nightstick and he's tapping it on Kevin Costner's chest, and he says, "What are you prepared to do?" You know, and then there's a big dramatic pause. What are you prepared to do? And there's a lot to that line. And I think we can take that. You know, now you and I, we aren't making movies, and we're not involved in anything as dramatic as driving trucks through warehouse doors and breaking open kegs of beers with axes for the camera and things like that. But there's a lot of things in life, particularly our spiritual growth. There's a lot of things in life that one sentence, that one question, if we will simply pause and ask ourselves, what are you prepared to do? It kind of helps us really get focused. So think about it in terms of your spiritual growth, discovering your soul, discovering the unity with all of life, discovering the presence of the divine within, and not just knowing about it intellectually, but experiencing it. You know, living it, having it live as you and through you. What are you prepared to do? And the question itself, there's certain, you know, I love to look at things and say, but what came first, you know? What would there have to be before that for that to even make sense? And there's an assertion that there's an action required. Do. What are you going to do? Doing is an action. So there's an assumption in the question that there's an action required. Something has happened in the movie line, something has happened that requires a reaction or a response, or at least an action. Excuse me, I gotta get a sip of water here. Got a little dry in here. So there's an assumption that there's an action that is required. And then the question, there's another assumption that the person who is being asked the question is the one who is going to respond, is the one who has the ability to respond, is the one who is responsible to respond. And then there's another, perhaps more subtle implication from the question, which means there's an understanding. There's an intellectual understanding. There's some type of an analysis, right? So somebody asks Kevin Costner, what are you prepared to do? He has to stop and think. He has to think about what happened. He has to think about what needs to happen now. He has to kind of take his mind. You know, I love this idea of our ability in our minds to travel in time. You know, we can go forward and we can project and we can start to see how things play out in different ways. You know, it's just absolutely incredible that we can do this. Well, if I do this, then that, and if I do the other thing, then this other thing. You know. It's almost like playing a chess game in our heads with nothing's really moving on the board in front of us, but in our mind it's all unfolding, it's all taking place. So there's this assumption then that when we ask, what are you prepared to do, that there is an ability to know. There is an intellectual capacity to know and to understand and to think it through, you see. And then there's an ability to decide. We have to weigh the alternatives. Costner had to weigh the alternatives, but in our spiritual life, we have to weigh the alternatives, and we have to decide. We have to make a decision. Of all of the possible courses of action that we could take, which one today? Which one now? You know, maybe tomorrow a different one, but today, just for today, what is my course of action today? And once we come to an understanding of what the possible actions are and what the preferred action might be, then we have to do another sort of analysis. You know. Do we have the resources? Are we capable, you know, of performing whatever action is required? Do we have the time? Do we have the money? Do we have the equipment, if special equipment is required? You know. And most importantly, do we have the desire? Is this something that you really want to do? Right? Napoleon Hill tells us in Think and Grow Rich that desire is the starting point of all achievement, you know, and he was coming at it strictly from a materialistic sense of the world. And I love the way he wrote his book. He said, now all of this works because there's a spiritual law behind what I'm telling you. But if I told you about the spiritual law, you would think I was trying to teach you a new religion. And I don't want to get caught up in that discussion. So just do what I'm telling you to do, and it'll work, see? And I love the way he did that. There was something deeper. There was something behind what he was trying to tell everybody. But he said, don't get caught up in that. You'll waste time in the semantics of arguing about, well, but is that what my religion teaches and all these things? He said, just do it. Just try it. And he said, desire is the starting point of all achievement. Do you want it? What is it that you want? And do you want it enough to do the things that need to be done to have it? It's a key question. When I was in sales, there was a saying that discipline is what kept us going long after the enthusiasm of our commitment had worn off. And what they were talking about is, we would go to these sales rallies and everybody would get all excited. And they were designed to get everybody excited. Everybody would get all excited and they would get whipped up, And then they would say, now who's going to commit to sell $100,000 worth of product this year, whatever it was you were selling. In those days, $100,000 was a lot of money. And of course, people would jump up and they'd say, I'm going to be in the winner's circle next year, and all those things. And then you leave the rally and you go back home, and you've got to get back on the phone and start cold calling. Got to go knock on doors. Got to go out and make presentations. You have to do what needs to be done. You have to close the sales. And what happens is after a couple of weeks, everybody says, yeah, well, that was a great rally, but let's get real here. I'm probably only going to sell $50,000 this year. So what are you prepared to do? What are we prepared to do long after the enthusiasm of making the commitment has worn off? And I believe it's the desire that carries us through. It is the desire that moves us forward. It is this wanting, this kind of hunger, if you will, for the experience that keeps us moving forward. So from one place in the East, we get this saying, don't pursue God unless you're willing to do so as you would look for a pond if your hair was on fire. If your hair was on fire. And that's an admonition. It says you have to really want your spiritual growth. You have to really want your spiritual practice. You have to really earnestly desire it, because then you will do the things that ought to be done, the things that you need to do in order to have this experience of the presence of God. So we tie this then from the movies, from Sean Connery asking Kevin Costner, what is it that you are prepared to do? We then transfer this over into our own life. And it can be in your everyday living. It can be in your work. It can be in your hobbies. It can be in anything. What do you really want? What is it that you really want? And do you want it? Do you want it enough to do what ought to be done, to do the things that need to be done? So I want to stop right there for just a moment, because that's going to require some clarification. This is a point of contention amongst theologians that we kind of have to we kind of have to understand. We kind of have to break through. At different stages of development in our lives and in our spiritual growth, different things are appropriate. And the things that were appropriate at the beginning stages of growth are no longer appropriate later in life, later in our growth. So from the point of view of developing as an infant, as a baby, as our bodies physically develop, you can see how every stage of development was absolutely perfect. I just love when people post the pictures of the babies on the internet, the children, the new ones, the new arrivals that we all just kind of look at. I had a beautiful experience yesterday. I went downtown to meet a friend at a coffee shop, and this little family came in, and it was 4 girls, and the youngest was 3 and the oldest was 4, and I don't know how they did it. I don't know whether they had 2 sets of twins or whether they had triplets and one, or what, but there was these 4 precious little ones, and they were all about the same size. And they were just so happy. They were all just so happy. You could tell that they spent a lot of time with mommy and daddy, and they were just so happy. And it was precious. It was precious for them to come in, and everybody in the coffee shop gave them a big hello, and they smiled back, and they there was no strangers in that place to them. They would talk to anybody and tell them their life story, just such a wonderful time of life. And if we look at the little babies as they develop, it's just incredible how much intelligence is there, how perfect the unfoldment is within them. And there's something within them that guides them. No one has to tell them what to do, but they do it. They pick up their little heads, and the first thing we might marvel at with our child when we put it in the crib on its stomach, is it picked its little head up and it rolled its head over from one side to the other. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. When you're a new parent, that is just a miracle. You got to get on the phone and tell grandma and grandpa about it. These days you would take pictures with your cell phone, send them off, And then they start to push themselves up. They get their little hands underneath their shoulders, and they push themselves up, and they kind of turn and they look around, and they're building those little muscles, and they're building the little back muscles, and they're exploring the world around them, And you think, well, this is just absolutely wonderful, And then amazingly, one day when you're not looking, it's always when you're not looking, they roll over, You go back in the room and, oh my goodness, they're on their back now. I put them on their stomach and now they're on their back, Again, get on the phone, call all the relatives, take pictures. There's an unfoldment taking place, There's stages, there's little steps that are taking place. Later they kind of get up on their knees, and they're up on their hands and knees, and they're up on all fours. And you think, well, look at that, that's wonderful. And then they kind of plop over, and then they're sitting up, wow. Then maybe they grab on the side of the crib and pull themselves up, and they're standing for a nanosecond, as their little legs kind of wobble. And then boom, plop, they go right down on their bottom. But it's not very far because they're so little, you see, and it's so perfect. And they go back on their bottom, and then they roll over onto their hands and knees. Eventually they start crawling, Every stage of that development is perfect. And every stage of that development leads to walking. Because they're learning their balance, they're learning how to hold on to things, they're learning how to steady themselves, and eventually they learn how to step away. Eventually they learn how to come and take a couple steps, you see. And then before you know it, they're just scooting all around the house. And all of the things that you thought you had made child safe in your home, now you find out, oh no, they can get in the cabinets, they can get a hold of anything, and now everything starts to go up, Perfect development. And then eventually they learn how to run, They learn how to ice skate, they learn how to ski, they learn how to do all those things. Now once they've learned how to walk, it would be silly for them to go back to crawling. Now some of them do as they're developing, they alternate. But once they really learn how to walk, they will rarely ever go back to crawling unless there's a reason to do it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that it would be very, very silly of us to look at a baby who's in the process of just learning how to build muscles and gain balance and say, what are you doing? What are you doing like that? You're supposed to be walking. Why are you wasting your time? Why are you on your hands and knees crawling? You're supposed to be walking. Don't you know human beings can walk? Look at your older siblings. They're walking. Look at mommy and daddy. They're walking. Why are you doing that? See, we wouldn't do that because we know it's exactly appropriate for them to be crawling at that time. And we would not go to a teenager who knows how to walk and knows how to run and say, well, what are you doing? Why aren't you crawling? You're supposed to be crawling. It would be inappropriate for them to do so at that stage of their development. So what we have to remember is there are lots of different opinions out there. There are lots of different pieces of advice and instructions that have been given over the years on what to do for spiritual growth. But what has been missing, or what seems to be missing, when we look at these is there's no context. There's no context that says, well, when you're at this stage in your development, these are the things that are appropriate. And when you're at that stage of your development, those are the things that are appropriate. And when you're at the next stage of development, there are these other things that are appropriate. So the result is that we kind of get confused, and maybe we're trying to look at a practice that we've already moved through and we've used it, and we have developed in the manner that it was appropriate for us to develop with it, but now it's time to let it go and move on. So it would be silly for us to keep going back to it, as silly as it would be for a teenager to get down on their hands and knees and crawl. Or maybe we are in the stage of learning how to crawl in our spiritual growth, in that aspect of our spiritual life, and we are trying to do something that is for a different stage. As silly as it would be for a baby to get up and try to run. So I just put that out there for you in that what today is about consistency in practice. Last week we talked about the importance of practice. Today we're talking about the consistency in practice. And if I asked you, what are you prepared to do? So there would be an assumption there that practice is going to be the answer that you're going to eventually come to. And you're going to do some analysis, and you're going to do some evaluation, and you're going to look at the different types of practices that are available, and you're going to select one or two or maybe three that are appropriate for you at this stage in your spiritual growth. In other words, you're not going to try to take something. For example, we have stories, and I don't know that they're true or not, but we have stories of these gurus who could be buried underground for 40 years, and they could live for 40 years without breathing oxygen because they have learned how to absorb prana, or energy, life energy, without breathing. Now, maybe that's true, and if it was true, even if it was true, if you and I tried it, we probably wouldn't survive very long, right? Because we're not there yet. We're not there. We haven't moved that far along yet. If you think of growth as a continuum. So if we try to do something that we haven't kind of done the preliminary work, the groundwork, we haven't done the steps that are required to get there, and we try to do something that we're not yet prepared to do, we're going to fail. And we not only get disheartened, but then we start to lose our ambition. We start to lose our desire. Think of in the Greek mythology of Milo, who went out every day and picked up the calf. Just every day went out and picked up the calf. Consistently, every day went out and lifted up that calf, every day. And as the calf grew, his ability to lift, his strength grew with it, until, according to the mythology, he was able to lift a full-grown bull. And how did he do that? A little bit every day. That's the moral of the story, right? The message, the theme. A little bit every day. A little bit every day. If you go into the caverns around the world, you'll see the beautiful croppings, the stalactites, the stalagmites. One coming down from the top and one coming up from the floor of the cave. These beautiful, beautiful forms. And we look at them and we say, well, what did that? How did they form? Very slowly, consistently, water seeped through the roof of the cave and it dripped down. Slowly, over the years. Drip, drip, drip. And as each drip of water came down, it left behind a microscopic deposit of minerals. I mean, if you looked at any one drop of water and looked in there for the minerals that make up the stalactites and stalagmites, you probably couldn't see it. Maybe if you put it under a magnifying glass, you might see some. Maybe if you put enough of that water in a jar and let it evaporate, you might see some dust at the bottom of the jar. But if you just looked at the drop of water, you couldn't see it. And yet, over the millions and millions of years that cave was there, the slow and consistent drip of the water built up those formations. We go out to Arizona and we look at the Grand Canyon, and you can see what the consistency of the flowing water has done. The sandstone formations that over millions of years the water has just slowly eroded. You know, we're reading the Tao in our Wednesday night class now, and we're at the part where it's talking about water being the softest, one of the softest things. You know, you put your hand down in water and it's just wet. You know, you now, of course, if you dive from high enough and you do a belly flop and land on the water, you suddenly realize that it is hard. But in general, the slow-moving water is soft. You see. If the river is going downstream and you stick something in the river, you know, the water just kind of flows around it. Just goes around it. Just, you know, not a big struggle or a big strain. It may make ripples, but it just goes around it. But if we leave whatever it is that we put in that stream, if we leave it there for long enough, it's gone. The water will wear it away through consistency. So what we're getting to is, what are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do? And I think when we ask and answer that question, we have to ask, well, what is the most important thing in my life? What is the most important thing in our lives? I mean, there are so many things that we could do. There are so many things that we could be involved in. But we can't be involved in all of them at the same time. We have to prioritize. We have to pick. We have to choose. I remember when we first started using day planners in business, you know, we'd sit down every morning and make out our list of things to do that day. And we would label them top priority and medium priority and so on. And I would sit down and I would have a list of 20 or 25 things to do that day. And then I would keep track. See, I would keep track of what I actually did. And if I did 3, if I was able to do 3 of that entire list and get them to completion, that was a good day for me. Because the job that I had at the time was largely interrupt driven. It was a service department. So a customer called in and needed service, you had to stop what you were doing and go take care of that request. You go back to doing something, and then another request would come in, and then go back to doing something, and another request would come in. I started to realize then that of the 8 scheduled hours in a day, I might actually only have 2 to 3 that would be free time. So it became obvious that this list of 20 or 25 things was ridiculous. It wouldn't get done. Nevertheless, I kept making that list. Nevertheless, I kept putting these 20 or 25 things on. Until finally I realized I was just wasting my time. I wasn't going to get them done. If they were going to get done, somebody else was going to have to do them. We would have to delegate them or find somebody else to do them. So I became more realistic in my approach to time management. And I realized how important it was to identify the top 3 priorities, because that was all that was going to get done that day from the list. A lot would get done, a lot that wasn't on the list. But from the list, I could really only control getting done 2 or 3. So what is the most important thing in your life? Is it on the very top of your priority list? Have you asked yourself what you are prepared to do in order to accomplish it? Have you evaluated the options? What are the different things that you could be doing? Have you put them into a context? Are these the appropriate actions for me to be taking at this stage of my development? Do you have the time and the equipment and the place in order to do them? And then are you doing them consistently? As I sit here today, I can tell you that I'm stiff and I'm sore. And I'm stiff and I'm sore. If you ask me why, the answer that sounds good, there's 2 reasons everybody does everything. The one that sounds good and the real one. The one that sounds good is I went to the gym last night. Oh, how wonderful is that? But that's not the real reason I'm stiff and sore. The real reason is I haven't gone to the gym to work out for 3 weeks. See, it requires consistency. And if we start something and then stop, and then take it up again and then stop, and then take it up again and then stop, we may be busy, but we're not really making progress. We're not really moving along. I learned this particularly when I was learning skills, like flying an airplane. When I was learning how to fly an airplane, or play golf was another example. You could learn the basics intellectually. You could understand the basics. It wasn't too awfully hard to understand. You know, I mean, think about driving a car. If you were to ask me, what do you have to do to drive a car? Well, you step on one pedal, it makes it go, and you step on another pedal, and it makes it stop. And if you turn the steering wheel, it goes from side to side. You know, and then you have a gear shift lever that says whether you're going to go frontwards or backwards. That's it. That's kind of the simplest part of it. Those are the controls. Now, learning how to use them safely and skillfully and under control, well, that's a different story, you see. It takes practice. It takes practice. So when I was learning how to fly, I came to realize if I didn't go out at least every 3 weeks and fly for an hour, I lost ground. So if I waited 5 weeks and went out and I flew for an hour, the first 30 minutes that I was flying, I was trying to regain the skills that I had lost through lack of consistency. And then maybe the second half of the hour of flight time, I was now improving. I was now building. Right? And if you put it in terms of dollars and cents, which it was costing me to do that, I was throwing away half of my money by not going out on a regular basis. If you've learned how to play a sport, I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, whether it be tennis or golf or anything that requires a skill. So I invite you then to think of your spiritual growth as being something that is a skill. It is an art. Ernest Holmes says spiritual mind treatment is an art. Can you imagine an artist who picks up the paintbrushes once every couple months? Can you imagine Leonardo, if he went by the chapel and said, well, I'll get back to doing the roof tomorrow, maybe the next day. There's a consistency. There's a consistency. And when we apply ourselves and when we are consistent, then what happens is we start to grow. But if we just kind of do things once in a while, we don't grow. William James, in his works, it was around 1896, the Edinburgh Lectures. Trying to think if that's the exact title, but you'll find it if you search for William James. He gave a series of lectures at Edinburgh University in Scotland, and he said that, it's Varieties of Religious Experience. There it is. It came to me. William James, Varieties of Religious Experience. He said that people become aware of a religion, they become exposed to religion, and just kind of like I was relating to you with the salesman, we kind of get excited about it. And he says, but for most people, nothing changes other than they feel better. If you go and look at people who say that they've had some type of a spiritual awakening, and you look at their life before and their life after, not much has changed other than their attitude. They just feel better about it. And he says it's not until people actually start applying themselves, that you begin to see a noticeable change. So the one thing that I was getting to is this idea of doing something, or awakening is by an act of grace, is the way traditional religious would say it. There's this argument about you and I, we can't do anything. We can't do anything to make ourselves more spiritual. That this act of spiritual awakening is an act of grace. And the answer is it's both. We have to make ourselves available to it. We have to begin, like the child crawling before it can walk. We have to begin. We have been given free will, and we have to decide that we want to make ourselves available to the love of God. Now, ultimately, it is the love of God. It is the activity in our consciousness. It is the change in our consciousness that occurs when we experience the presence of God. That's what changes us. Emmett Fox says the only thing that changes consciousness is prayer. And I would say that not all prayer changes consciousness, but any prayer in which we experience the presence of God has a change. Like the water flowing through the Grand Canyon, it has a change. Now, everybody would like to have the big aha, knocked off the horse, blinded by the light kind of awakening. And it's possible. But we have to make ourselves available to it. And we do that by doing things that seem very ordinary and very routine, and things that we have been told for years and years and years to do, but we have to make it a priority. So what is the most important thing in our lives? And that would be discovering and experiencing our spiritual nature. I'm going to toss that out as that's my suggestion. Think about that. Is that the most important thing in your life? See, everything else is turning to dust. Right? Everything else is going away. The houses we live in, the bodies that we live in, the cars that we drive, the companies we work for, everything else is going away. But our spirit, our soul. So isn't the most important thing that we can do to learn more about that, to become more conscious of that? Almost every religion, if we look at them, they're all in one shape or form saying that the fundamental problem that human beings have is this idea of separation from God. Now, for some, it is a real separation, a physical separation. God is out there and we're over here. But nevertheless, the solution to that problem is to be reunited. For other people, the problem is not a physical one as it is a mental one. It is an attitude. It is an idea. That we don't think of ourselves as being united with God. We don't think of ourselves as the very presence, omnipresence, being right here, being with us. And in that regard, what we need to do is we need to let go of all of those ideas of separation. All of those ideas of separation. We're never going to make ourselves more spiritual than we are now. There's nothing that we can do to make ourselves more spiritual than we are now. But we can become more aware of that. And we become more aware of that not by trying to add more unto ourselves, but by letting go of those things that are not true. Like the sculptor who says, you take the block of stone and you chip away everything that doesn't look like the angel, and when you're left, you have the angel. The angel is inside of each one of us. And our spiritual practice then is for the purpose of casting off and letting go. So, is it on our priority? Have we decided what our practice is going to be? Lori and I wrote a little booklet on the tools in your metaphysical toolbox, and we offer 4 different practices there: treatment, meditation, visualization, and affirmation. And those are just 4. And if you don't have it, you'd like a copy, shoot me an email and I'll send you a PDF file with it. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali have 113 different meditation techniques in there. Osho expands on those in his Book of Wisdom and tells us more about them. Meister Eckhart tells us if there was only one prayer that we could utter and it was thank you, that would be sufficient. Whatever practice you decide upon, you must be consistent with it. You can't say thank you once in the morning and then go through the rest of your day in a bad attitude. Be consistent with it. If you're going to do treatments and meditation, do you have a time and a place to do that? We have rituals in our lives. When we're going to bed, we may not think of it as such, but we have a ritual when we're going to bed. You go and you brush your teeth and you wash your face and you take off your day clothes and you put on your night clothes and you fluff up your pillow and you lay down in bed and you turn out the light. And all of these things are a ritual that is telling your consciousness now is the time to go to sleep. By creating a time and place in your home for your spiritual practice, you are setting up a sort of a ritual that says, now is my time for communing with God. Whether it be turning down the lights, lighting a stick of incense, putting on a candle, putting on some soft music, whatever it is, find your ritual. Find your ritual. Some people create little sacred places in their home, little altars, and they put little religious icons there. And all that does is it helps them to get into that state, into that mood. When they're in that place, it is a sacred place. They are now entering into the sacred place within. And be consistent. And be consistent. Mark it in your day planner. Mark it in your calendar. How much time are we really spending? How much time have we really dedicated to our practice? When I was learning how to sell, I read a book, Frank Bettger was the author's name, and the title of the book was How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. And it was written in the 30s, and it was in the style of Dale Carnegie and the other self-help books that were written in the 30s. It had a lot of anecdotes in it and things like that. But Bettger said that he had been a baseball player and he had to retire because he heard something. And he became a life insurance salesman. And he was failing miserably at it. And he went to the office one day, and his intention was to clean out his desk and quit. And the district sales manager came in and called the general rally and had everybody go to the auditorium where they all met. And what the general manager said, if you show me a salesperson who will sincerely show our product to 3 new people every day, I will show you someone who cannot fail. And Betcher went back to his desk and he said, well, that's not true. Here I am, I'm busy all the time, I'm working all the time, and that's not true. And then he stopped to reflect upon what he had been doing. And he had been visiting with people, he had been chatting with people, he had been traveling here and traveling there and doing this and doing that. But he wasn't sincerely telling his story, his sales story, to 3 new people every day. And he said, well, he'd try it. And he started keeping records. He used 3x5 index cards. He started keeping records of how many new people he saw every day. And he realized that he wasn't seeing 3. And then he started to ask himself, well, what can I do to see 3? How can I find 3 new prospects, you see? What are you prepared to do? What are you prepared to do? And this helped him to focus. And once he did that, he became successful. The rest of the story is how he then started to figure out which were the most effective prospects he was meeting and how could he become more effective. But the point is, he had to keep track. He had to keep track. We need to make our spiritual practice a priority. We need to select the right one for us. I can't tell you what the right one for you is. But I can tell you there's a world of them available. And you need to find the one that works for you now. And if it stops working for you in a month, then you find another one. And if that stops working for you in a month, then you find another one. The Buddha gave us one that was so simple. He said, just breathe in through your nose and observe the gap between breathing in and breathing out. And then breathe out through your mouth and find the gap and enter the gap. That was it. That was it. Meister Eckhart says, say thank you. We might sit and try different meditation techniques till we find the one that works for us. We may adopt a time every day or twice a day to practice our spiritual mind treatment. We can do affirmations all day long. We can take time to sit and visualize. But we have to find the one that works for us, and then we have to work it. And then we have to work it. And as we do so consistently, what happens is we begin to experience the presence of God. And it is that experience of the presence of God that changes us, that changes us. And what is this change that we're talking about? It is letting go of ideas of separation. What is the most important thing in your life? What are you prepared to do? There's a saying from the Buddha that goes around the internet every few weeks, and the saying is as follows, quote, the problem is you think you have time, unquote. We think we have time, but now's the time. Now's the time. No more distractions. No more flitting from here to there to there. Make our growth our top priority. Find a practice that works for us. Find a time when you can do it. If you're too busy during the day, get up earlier. Stay up later. Set your clock for the middle of the night. Whatever you need to do. Find something that you can practice all day long. Give thanks. Use affirmations. Find what works and work it. That's the only secret there is. The only secret there is. Divine love has created us to discover it. Consistent practice is the way to make the discovery. And so it is.